Good morning. Welcome back to Rio Grande Perspectives. My name is Chris, and today, God willing, we are going to get back into our discussion about Paul, this time focusing specifically on Paul and the Torah. I made some earlier videos about Paul. The last one had to do with Paul as being exactly the person that Jesus warned us about over and over and over again. So I will leave the link to those videos in the description below. And without any further delay, let's get into it. As I've said before, I believe that Paul's writings are meant to be confusing. They are meant to be incoherent. They are meant to be capable of understood in various ways. It is a seed of strife, of confusion, of conflict, and above all, it is meant to distract a person from the teachings and the spiritual disciplines that are laid out very clearly and beautifully by Jesus, and present you with an alternative which has to do with a lot of subjective feelings, which has to do with a lot of specialized vocabulary. I believe that many of us feel a degree of disdain for Christianese. I think a lot of Christianese, well, maybe all Christianese really comes ultimately from Paul's writings. The other thing that Paul's writings lead a person to is to have very dark ideas about God. You can't believe that God has your best interest in mind if, after all, God gave a nation that he chose for a special mission. He gave them a Torah and a heritage of religious guidance and rules and regulations. If those things are inherently bad or inadequate, or they just frustrate grace, there's no way around it. This paints a dark picture of God. I think it also Paul paints a pretty dark picture of humanity, very pessimistic view. And Jesus, in the Gospels, he comes across as a messenger of a loving God, giving us a path, a very good path to walk, all kinds of extremely good spiritual disciplines, concrete, objective things to be busy with, good works to strive for and do. And instead, Paul is able, with his writings, to just brush that all aside and give us a bunch of incoherent, absurd teachings where nobody is on the same page. In fact, basically everything that Jesus taught has to be looked at as either not applying to us or being of some other time frame. Many Christian theologians have even, because of Paul, have had to conclude that Jesus must have been what they call Old Covenant, because it's so works-based. So I guess Jesus is out of style. Paul is the guy with the actual truth. Paul is the guy with the way to be living, the way to strive in. But nobody can agree what Paul means. Even among his most ardent admirers, you can't find two people that can come to an agreement as to what to make of his puzzling statements, and we will get into exactly that in just a few minutes. As I've said before, I believe that it's by design that Paul is incoherent, that he is absurd, that he is confusing, It's not just some accident. It's not just the result of poor articulation on his part. It's not just an absence of some, systematic approach in his writing. No, I mean, these are often suggested by people who get into the study of Paul. But these are these are nearly atheistic explanations of things. I think looking at things like this is very foolish. It's kind of like when people, take politics at face value, and they think it's a genuine tug of war between different ideals, and they believe in certain candidates, and they invest their attention and in some cases their money or their volunteering time for political campaigns. It's utterly foolish. You look at politics, and instead of getting bogged down in the mechanics of how it works, you see actually what it does. You are able to discern its nature by the effect that it has on people. You see that it drains people of their good emotions, their good feelings. It drains people of their attention. It drains people of their time and of their money. It leaves them feeling disappointed, used. It leaves them feeling bitterness, even hatred towards people of the other parties. It never delivers on its promises. One of the worst things about politics is that it sort of makes people consent to the wrongs that are done to them, and it distracts them away from other pursuits that are infinitely more valuable and proper to them. When we achieve a certain level of spiritual maturity, we discern and understand what politics is. And then the right course, of course, is to totally abstain from it. Politics is one of those games which the only way to win is to not play the game at all. If we take that same sort of maturity and discernment and we look at Paul, we can brush aside these pedestrian explanations for the confusing nature of the Pauline writings. And instead what we find is that it's meant to be that way. That is the design. And again, I'm not saying that it's Paul's design. I think there is a certain degree where he himself says that he, to the Jews, is as a Jew. To the Gentiles, he's as a Gentile. He strives to be all things to all men. And that, of course, is going to produce a lot of irreconcilable statements. But I think really what's going on with Paul's writings is so far above Paul. We are dealing with a spiritual adversary which has superhuman powers of organization, of strategy. And that's really what's going on. I think whatever mischief and bad motives that we might detect in Paul are really nothing at all compared to the one who is really pulling the strings in Paul's career. Again, look at the results. No two people can agree as to what he means. 40,000 denominations. Virtually nobody in Christianity believes that the Christian faith is to apply oneself very concretely, very objectively to the things that Jesus said to do. Very, very few Christians believe that they have to do these things that Jesus said in order to be a Christian. Instead, Christianity by nearly everybody is regarded as a religion of beliefs, which by their nature, beliefs are very personal, they're very subjective. This is thanks to Paul, because over and over and over in his writings, you find him pitting Torah with faith, works with grace. The Pauline way is we believe our way to salvation, whereas the Jesus way is, look, we all believe in God, so it's time to make good on that and to be busy doing exactly those things which God has always told us to be busy doing from day one through all of his servants, the prophets. So get at it, get busy. Let's strive for excellence in those things. But of course, that's a horrible sounding idea to people dedicated to Pauline teachings. That sounds like a works-based salvation. We can't have that. This is not just my axe to grind. This is not just me finding fault with Paul where no such controversies exist. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, just in the time between now and my previous video, I found this amazing article from the Gospel Coalition website, and many people will readily recognize the Gospel Coalition as just the most perfectly orthodox mainstream bunch of evangelical Christians that you could ever hope to find. I will leave a link to this article. I can't read the whole thing here because it would turn this video into a very long video, but this is called Paul and the Law, Observations on Some Recent Debates by John Barclay. And again, I'll put this in the description below. What Barclay does here, he quotes all kinds of major Christian theologians, Christian scholars throughout the last couple hundred years, and this does such an amazing job at substantiating what I'm saying here. I will read a couple select passages from here, and I'll just encourage you to read the whole thing if you're interested. So it starts out, Paul's statements on the law have always been a source of confusion and controversy. Even his own churches were confused by his insistence on freedom from the law. And Barclay has a lot of scriptural citations throughout his text, which you can see here. I'm not going to read all those. Again, you can access that if you go to the link. Even his own churches were confused by his insistence on freedom from the law, and Christians in other parts of the early church were incensed by what they understood of his proclamation of a law-free gospel. Small wonder, then, that ever since his letters became accepted as Christian scriptures, Paul's remarks about the law have sometimes been hailed as the essence of the gospel, sometimes rejected as incoherent and idiosyncratic, and frequently misunderstood. If one gathers together Paul's chief statements on the law and related issues, they present a bewildering appearance. Sometimes the Greek term nomos clearly refers to the Mosaic Torah, but sometimes it seems to have the generalized sense of rule or principle. On many occasions, Paul declares categorically that Christians have died to the law and are free from it. while in some instances he is confident that they uphold and fulfill it. In several extended passages, he contrasts the law with faith or with Christ, but on one occasion he refers to a nomos of faith, and on 2 occasions alludes to a nomos of Christ. Moreover, in what seems to be intended as a summary statement about the relationship between Christ and the law, it is unclear whether the crucial Greek noun telos is to be understood as end, termination, or goal fulfillment. How can Paul insist that there is no justification by works of the law, and yet talk of judgment by works? When circumcision is one of the commands of God in the Old Testament, how can Paul tell the Corinthians that it does not matter if they are not circumcised, so long as they keep the commands of God? Did Paul think that it was impossible to be justified by works of the law because no one can keep the law? Or because even keeping the law would not be the proper path to justification? And most fundamentally of all, if the law is the holy law of God, how could Paul regard it as responsible for sin, curse, and death? And how could he play down its significance because it was ordained by angels through an intermediary? These are only some of the most important questions raised by Paul's remarks about the law, but they will suffice to indicate the complexity of the problem and how it is intimately bound up with many other themes in Paul's theology and ethics. Not surprisingly, such questions have spawned an enormous volume of literature even in the last few decades. So yes, it has done that because that's the purpose. That was Satan's goal in sending Paul on this mission of confusion, of division, and of distracting people from the actual gospel of Jesus. So after this, Barclay is going to go on and examine the findings of many very significant scholars in this Christian tradition, which is not a Paul-rejecting branch of Christianity. That's the irony. These, again, are people who the Gospel Coalition is, John Barclay is able to recognize the effect of Paul's writings. He's able to see the confusing nature of these writings and the power they have to divide and distract people, but everybody is treating it in this pedestrian way. No, who is looking at it from 30,000 feet and saying that the effect that it's having is the key to discerning just what it is? Barclay continues, such different emphases have an obvious impact on one's interpretation of the Pauline texts, as is well illustrated by 2 influential British scholars. F.F. Bruce is very close to the Lutheran tradition when he writes that it is plain that Paul believed and taught that the law had been in a major sense abrogated by Christ. Christ is the end of the law, which is absolutely staggering. F.F. Bruce, as many people know, is a really, really big deal. And for him to think that Christ abrogated the law, when in so many places over and over and over again, Christ is telling people how absolutely critical the law is. This testifies to the power of confusion and distraction and deception that is latent in Paul's writings. Later on, Barclay continues, there are, of course, other ways of explaining Paul's paradoxical statements about the Christian's relationship to the law. One popular approach is to distinguish between the moral parts of the law and its ceremonial or ritual regulations. I think I included that quote because it's an example of the attempt that people make at, finding some mysterious way where Paul meant one thing when he said nomos in one place, but meant a different thing in another place, but it just doesn't hold up. And in fact, this article by Barclay will eventually get into that. He says, when he wrote Galatians, Paul had an unreservedly negative view of the law, and even described it as given by angels in order to lead men into transgressions. Such a demonic origin, together with its impossible demands, meant that the Christian should have nothing to do with the law. However, Paul received such a violent reaction to his letter from both Galatia and from the Jerusalem church that he was forced to reconsider his opinions and iron out some of their inconsistencies. A little bit later, he says, on this view, then, it is impossible to harmonize all the different statements about the law in Paul's letters. One must allow for a substantial development in Paul's thinking on the matter. Okay, fair enough. People change, people develop in their ideas, but that's not admissible in a case where we are saying that Paul's writings are scripture. If these writings were from God, there is no development. God doesn't need to, work out his philosophy and come to better and clearer ideas about things. So if we want to say that Paul simply got better ideas about things as time went on and he learned, well then that right there, it should be perfectly obvious that Paul's writings then are not scripture. If they're changing, if they're inconsistent with one another, no further need for discussion. He's not really part of the Bible. Perhaps the most important book in challenging standard interpretations of Paul is E.P. Sanders' Paul and Palestinian Judaism. This is a massive book running to over 550 pages, and its length understandably daunts most students. But its size reflects the huge job Sanders hopes to achieve, to demolish entirely the prevailing consensus on the legalistic nature of Palestinian Judaism, and to provide a more accurate understanding of Paul's relationship to and critique of Judaism. Sanders aims to give a holistic comparison of the pattern of religion in Judaism and Paul, and from the start he declares his strong disagreement with the long line of Christian interpreters of Judaism who have taken Paul's contemporaries to be nitpicking legalists concerned only with the outward observance of the law and desperately seeking to amass credit before God by their own good works. Building on the work of G.F. Moore, Sanders runs through a long list of influential Protestant scholars in the last 100 years who have repeatedly caricatured Judaism as a legalistic religion seeking to appease an inaccessible God. Weber, Bousset, Schurer, Billerbeck, and Bultmann all come in for devastating criticism on this score. This is really important because, as I said in the earlier video about Paul and his vast influence, not only has Paul given the world a warped, untrue view of who Jesus was and what he stood for, but people just entirely misunderstand Judaism because of Paul. What I was getting at before is Paul is such a huge influence, and this is why we have to get into this. He's such a huge influence. He's misinforming not only Christians about Jesus and what real Christianity is, but he's misinforming people about Judaism. He misinforms people about God. There are so many people that can, barely give competing viewpoints a fair and objective consideration, because Paul has already decided things for them. They let Paul do their thinking for them. They take his word for it. People have a ridiculous idea of Judaism. Why? Because of Paul. Later he says, we are left with two options in considering Paul's attack on those who urged justification by works of the law. Either he was deliberately misrepresenting the Judaism he knew so well in making it out to be legalistic, or the point of his criticism is not legalism but something else. That again, it's amazing that people are able to come so close to seeing the problem here, but just cannot seem to take that necessary final step. Continuing in reviewing Sanders' work, Barclay says, one of the points he develops in the course of the book is that Paul is on the whole a coherent thinker, holding consistently to certain basic convictions. On the other hand, Paul is not a systematic thinker. He does not always relate his various conclusions to one another, and he gives many diverse and inconsistent explanations of the function of the law. Well, which one is it? It's just amazing, the ability that Paul's writings have to set different Christians at odds towards one another. We even see that Paul is able to set a Christian against himself. Here's Sanders. In one breath, he's saying Paul is on the whole a coherent thinker, and sort of systematic, and then Paul is also not a systematic thinker, not always coherent. It's just amazing. If Paul was not in the Christian canon, nobody would give him the time of day. His writings do not have that kind of merit. They don't merit any. His writings in and of themselves do not merit any attention. It's clearly just been foisted upon people, and now we have to deal with that. He goes on to talk about Heikki Räsänen, probably butchering that name. Paul and the Law. This is a hefty book interacting in great detail with a vast range of scholarly works, but its basic thesis can be summed up very simply. Paul's discussion of the law is wholly inconsistent and self-contradictory. Yeah. As far as Räsänen is concerned, glaring inconsistencies occur within each of Paul's letters and are so serious that they reduce many of Paul's arguments to logical absurdity. Contradictions and tensions have to be accepted as constant features of Paul's theology of the law. They are not simply of an accidental or peripheral nature. Yes, amen to that. Barclay says, to say that Paul was working with an implicit distinction between ceremonial, civil, and moral parts of the law is to impose an artificial distinction, not only on the Old Testament law, but also on Paul. To talk of a distinction between the law misused in legalism and the law rightly used as the will of God is, as Sanders has shown, wholly misleading. Both the Lutheran and Reformed approaches to this problem appear to reach a solution only by oversimplifying it and ignoring some of the awkward evidence. Absolutely. We could do a whole video focusing entirely on that article. It's so good. I have here a couple of quotes by Paul, just so you can get an idea what some of these scholars were talking about in Galatians 3. It says, "For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. But that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Yet the law is not of faith, but the man who does them shall live by them. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." Later in Galatians he says, "Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. But the Scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe." Again, it's like you're listening to a crazy person, to a clinically crazy person. Galatians 5. "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, that is, if you become converts to Judaism, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by law. You have fallen from grace, for we through the Spirit eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith." Galatians 5 in another place says, "I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law." You know, this is just, it's truly blasphemous. It's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. This emperor is, this is a buck-naked emperor. And if you haven't been raised in church and you're just looking at this, you know, without any expectation to just accept it because Paul is somehow part of the Bible, it's clear that this is just gibberish. It's nasty talk. It's blasphemous talk against God and against the Torah. And it has nothing to do with Jesus. In fact, when we think about what Jesus said about the law, we could look at Matthew 5. "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away." Does he say till the cross, till I die on the cross? No, he says till heaven and earth pass away. One jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And in the previous video we got into this least. Least is actually Paul's name. That's the meaning of his name. Paul is the Latin word for least. Matthew 19. And there are 4 other instances of this type of thing in the Gospels. As I said before, it seems that one of them is a repeat, and just based on the context, based on the description, it seems that we have 3 separate instances where somebody comes to Jesus for advice on life, advice on eternal life, and the direction given to that person by Jesus is to keep the law. In Matthew 19, "Now behold, one came and said to him, Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? So he said to him, Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is, God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. Jesus doesn't say if you want to enter into life, run away from the commandments, be led by the Spirit, get away from the yoke of bondage, make some profession of belief in me, and that's the way to eternal life. In fact, Jesus warns exactly against this kind of thing. Matthew 7, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Does the will of my Father in heaven. Not thinks about the will of my Father in heaven, not makes professions about believing in my Father in heaven, but does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Have we not cast out demons in your name and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. The Greek word there is anomia, means lawlessness. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. Okay? And there are more things like this that Jesus said. I don't want to turn this video into just a very pedantic, hours-long video where we look at every single verse, but as I've said before, many theologians have had to dismiss Jesus in order to accommodate Paul by saying that Jesus was part of the old covenant, and that's why he's going on and on and on about good works. It's just so wild what people are willing to do to keep their precious Paul. And of course, this is what Jesus is saying is consistent with the whole Jewish Bible. All right, we have the Torah, the prophets, the writings of the Jewish Bible from cover to cover. You never get any idea that there is something sneaky or devious about the law. In fact, from cover to cover, the Jewish Bible constantly talks about the law being a blessing, a delight, a good thing. It's a balm. It's a healing nourishment. And in fact, when we look at prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament, we consistently find that the Messiah is somebody who will take the Torah and bring it to the rest of the world. The book of Psalms begins with, happy is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, and does not stand in the path of the sinful, and sits not in the session of scorners, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. There you see in the classic Hebrew parallelism, two things are contrasted. You have wicked people, sinful people, and the opposite of that is the person who delights in the law of God. He meditates on that law. Moreover, it says, he shall be like a tree deeply rooted alongside brooks of water. Yeah, that's what you want to be. You want to be fertile. You want to be thriving. And the Jewish Bible is saying that that's how you get there. By meditating on the Torah, by observing it, by doing it. Everything he does will succeed. His leaf never withers. He bears fruit in its season. Not so the wicked. Rather, they are like the chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not be vindicated in judgment, nor the sinful in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord attends the way of the righteous, while the way of the wicked will perish. That's how the book of Psalms begins. You could look at Psalm 19. Psalm 19 talks about the amazing way that God constructed the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars. Everything has a very precise path and purpose for it, and it all runs like clockwork, and afterwards it links the amazing nature of the sky with the Torah. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament tells of his handiwork. Day following day utters speech, and night following night declares knowledge. There is no speech, and there are no words. Their sound is not heard. But their precision goes forth throughout the earth, and their words reach the end of the inhabited world. In their midst he has set up a tent for the sun, which is like a groom emerging from his bridal chamber. It rejoices like a powerful warrior to run the course. Its source is the end of the heavens, and its circuit is to their end. Nothing is hidden from its heat. The Torah of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. Right there. The Torah of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. Paul will sometimes in his statements make the case that the Torah of the Lord is good, but it crushes the soul. It just sort of overwhelms people with a sense of their guilt and leaves you there just broken and helpless. But that's just Paul's evil caricature of the Torah. The Torah itself is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is trustworthy, making the simple one wise. The orders of the Lord are upright, gladdening the heart. The command of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, altogether righteous. They are more desirable than gold, than even much fine gold, and sweeter than honey and the drippings from the combs. There is no way you can find anything like this in Paul's writings. When we look at actual things in the Hebrew Bible talking about the Messiah, we find the Messiah to be a figure in world history who is taking the Torah and presenting it in a way that is accessible for the rest of the world. A great example of this would be Isaiah chapter 2, which is agreed not only by Jews, but also Christians say that Isaiah chapter 2 is a messianic prophecy. But if we look at it, it says, "It will happen in the end of days. The mountain of the temple of the Lord will be firmly established as the head of the mountains, and it will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will go and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For from Zion will the Torah come forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge among the nations, and will settle the arguments of many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift sword against nation, and they will no longer study warfare." Okay, here we have a prophecy. Jews and Christians agree that this is a messianic prophecy. The only problem is Pauline Christians are blind to the fact that this Messiah is one who, instead of abrogating the Torah, like F.F. Bruce said, this is a Messiah who brings the Torah to a world of other nations, nations who are excited eager to learn Torah. They want to learn this stuff. They don't look at it like it was some mean old nasty trick by God. They don't think that it's bondage. They don't think that it's a yoke. They don't think that it's something to be kicked to the curb. They're eager to learn it. They're interested. They're hungry to learn the Torah. So Paul claims that he's the apostle of Jesus to the Gentiles. In what way is he presenting any type of factual Jesus to the Gentiles? Because the Jesus we find throughout Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Messiah that we find predicted in the prophets of the Old Testament, is a pro-Torah Messiah. So Paul going around telling Gentiles about some Messiah who's saving them from the yoke of the Torah, again, this is just one more deception of Paul. He's not an apostle. He's clearly not representing Jesus in any way, shape, or form. Paul is a man who was grifting on this movement. He made a name for himself. He got a following for himself by preaching easy believism. Let none of us be taken in by it. The other thing I see in Paul is how snaky he quotes the Bible. As I've said before, you get yourself a Bible that has the footnotes at the bottom, and where Paul is quoting something from the Old Testament, go and look up that verse. And nearly every time that he quotes the Bible, you go and you look up that verse in its original place, in its context, and it's a crime what he does to the Bible. It's all the proof you need that this man was lying. Let's go to Galatians 4. Now in Galatians, he's trying to dissuade Gentile followers of Jesus from becoming proper converts to Judaism. One of the devices that he uses to do this is to create an allegory. He says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, the son of the free woman through promise. Now this is an allegory. These women are 2 covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother, for it is written, 'Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not with labor pains. For the desolate has more children than she who has a husband.' Now we, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave and her son, for the son of the slave shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brethren, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman." Everybody who is familiar with the story of Abraham and Hagar and Sarah, and just the very basic genealogy of the Jews, recognizes that that Paul's allegory here is to totally turn things upside down, and therefore it utterly fails. He is trying to make the case that Judaism is slavery, but the person he is calling the descendants of the free woman are Isaac and his descendants, the Jews. Uh, so, Paul's own allegory here is self-defeating. And then to try to back it up even more, he quotes from Isaiah, a verse that has nothing to do with what he's saying. He quotes from Isaiah 54:1, has nothing to do with his ridiculous self-contradicting allegory, and it's just an example of the kind of thing you see almost all the time with Paul. Again, I just cannot stress this enough. Get yourself a Bible with the footnotes. Look up his citations of the Bible, and again, it's a crime. It's a crime what he does. Nobody should tolerate any of this stuff from him. I mean, think about Jesus' teaching about God. Jesus says that would a father, Jesus says, who of you being a father, if your son asks for a loaf of bread, is he going to give him a rock? If he asks for a fish, is he going to give him a snake? If he asks for an egg, will he give him a scorpion? Do you think God is going to give people a Torah that is just full of venom, of bad nourishment, of things that you can't really thrive on? Well, Paul is saying that that's exactly what happened. So, whom are we to believe, Jesus or Paul? The book of Revelation is introduced to us as a vision that Jesus gave to the Apostle John. And there are tons of references there to people who do God's will, that these are the redeemed, are the people who do God's will, that do good works. Let's look at Revelation 14. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them. Revelation 22. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie. It doesn't say blessed are they who profess, faith in some atonement theory. It says blessed are they who do his commandments. And it also warns against those who love and practice a lie. We need to make sure that we do not love the lies and the wishful thinking that Paul presents so much that it blinds us to the reality of what we're supposed to be doing in life and what our purpose here is and what the mission is. Now, some people might say, okay, you claim Paul is intentionally ambivalent, but that's just your interpretation. Evidently, many people find no such issue with Paul. Can you find even one place where Paul directly contradicted the law? And yes, we can. And that would be Paul's teaching on meat that has been sacrificed to idols. You find this in 1 Corinthians 10. He says, consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices partakers in the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. I imply that what pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be partners with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. All right. He goes on to say, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the market, without raising any questions on the ground of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, "This has been offered in sacrifice," then out of consideration for the man who informed you, and for conscience sake, I mean his conscience, not yours, do not eat it. For why should my liberty be determined by another man's scruples? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please all men in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So that was in 1 Corinthians 10, which is, very, very disturbing. I mean, even in that, you see, there's so much doublespeak. At the one hand, he's saying, there's nothing really to these idols, but he's saying what the pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons. So which one is it, Paul? In Corinthians 8, 1 Corinthians 8, it says, "Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge." That's gnosis. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if one loves God, one is known by him. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many such gods and many lords, now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if one loves God, one is known by him. He goes on to say, however, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through being until now accustomed to idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. Only take care lest this liberty of yours somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you, a man of knowledge, at table in an idol's temple, might he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge this weak man is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Look, it's a major transgression to eat food offered to idols. And this is true not just for Jews, but for anybody who becomes in any way aware of the one true God. You cannot eat food that has been sacrificed to idols under no circumstances. Even if you did take some idea that, well, idols are nothing, it's still part of God's due that we do not partake of these things. We're supposed to boycott stuff like this. And what's worse is Paul, as I read in the first passage, in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul himself says that when the pagans offer sacrifices to idols, they are offering them to demons. And he says that you cannot partake of these offerings and then partake of the things of God. Now, this might be a case where, again, we have this division where most people are looking most people are sort of dumbfounded by the very peculiar ambivalence that Paul demonstrates throughout his writings. And they might think, well, what is going on here with Paul? In one place he's saying, go ahead and eat of these things unless it causes some sort of scandal, among the company you keep. And on the other hand, he is saying that food offered to idols is food offered to demons, and that you cannot be a partaker of demons and a partaker of the things of God. And yet he's telling people it doesn't matter, food does not commend us to God, we're not better off if we eat it or don't eat it. I mean, first of all, this very Bible pretty much starts with people eating something they were told by God not to eat. Okay, so what we eat is a big deal. Killing an animal is a big deal. There is rules not only for Jews, but for all human beings regarding the welfare of animals. You can't just kill them in any which way you please. They can't be killed for just any old purpose. And this makes it even worse. If you're going to kill an animal as part of a service to a demon, you're really racking up a lot of very serious transgressions here. But to get back to the main point, on the one hand, Paul is saying if you do this, you are being a partaker with demons. But on the other hand, go ahead and do this because it's fine as long as it's not causing scandal to other people. And so people are naturally looking at this and they're wondering what is going on here with Paul. Here you have a case of his self-contradiction in the same passage. It's right side by side next to each other. And so to the pedestrian observer of this, they just don't know what to make of it. If we already have experience observing this type of phenomenon in the world in other places, then it becomes clear. We see that the adversary very often presents us with the truth of the matter right there in the presentation. Right? If we go back in time just 4 or 5 years ago, when people were putting medicine sticks in their arms, forgive me, I have to use some sort of code for this, with the medicine sticks, right? And people would have concerns about the safety of the medical sticks and wonder if they should be doing it, and they'd see all kinds of information coming to them, even through mainstream media, which would inform them that this is a poor choice. It's a high risk, very foolish thing to do, to get the medicine stick. And yet at the same time, the same system is pushing them to get the medicine stick. And so a lot of people are just confused by this. They're not sure what to make of it. Why would the system tell us that it's dangerous to get and reveal to us these stories about adverse reactions, and yet the same system is telling us to get the medicine stick? Well, that's because the devil has to do things within boundaries that are set by God. You find this throughout the Bible, especially in the book of Job, but even in other places. There are boundaries that he has to stay in. He can't give you a bad option without the fine print, without the disclosure, without the release of liability. He can't just totally trick you into partaking of demonic sacrifices. To eat food sacrificed to demons is to have a covenant meal, is to have a solemn covenant meal with a demon. Satan is informing you of this through Paul's words. He's saying this is the significance if you partake of this, but he's also saying, so come ahead and do it. And that's what's going on there in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10. And we see this all over the place in other parts of this reality. There are certain standards of disclosure which Satan has to obey. He's not able to do everything he wants. He's not able to deceive and to lure people in, without any regulations, without any stipulations. He is bound by certain moral necessities. This reminds me, just overall looking at all this, just to take a look at all of this overall. I have done work as a security guard, and looking at Paul makes me think of this work. When you're working security, you are put in charge of who can get into or get out of a certain location, and your whole job is to control access to that place, to that facility, and you're expected to do it 100%. 99% is not good enough. To fail in any way is to basically render your whole performance there irrelevant. Okay, so if you are doing security, there are certain credentials which anybody who is trying to gain access to the facility has to have these credentials. It's set by your superior, and you have to go by that. If the credentials are that somebody has to have 2 forms of specific ID or they don't get in, that's just what it is. Okay? That's what it is. And to mess up and to let them in is the ultimate failure in security. It doesn't matter if the person is crying. It doesn't matter if they're claiming that you are going to ruin their day. It doesn't matter if they have an entourage with them. It doesn't matter how convincing their story is. It doesn't matter if they tell you that their grandfather is the CEO of the entire operation there. If they cannot produce those credentials, you do not let them in, period. You don't let them in. And in fact, you never know. Maybe that CEO, every once in a while, he's going to test the security of that facility. Maybe he will have somebody attempt to get in without having the proper credentials, just to see how well his security detail is performing in their duties. This is not a test you want to fail. If you do that, you will lose your job there, and you will be blacklisted and never get a job anywhere else in security. Jesus gave us so many warnings about Paul. So many warnings. We see that the guy contradicts Jesus time and time and time again. He contradicts the Jewish Bible. Jesus warned about Paul in describing the ravenous wolf. He named Paul by name. We see that Paul made himself an apostle. There's already a meaning to the word apostle, and Paul doesn't fit it. There's only 12 apostles, not 13. We see that Paul's story about his conversion changes each time it's mentioned in Acts. Look it up for yourself. Chapter 9, chapter 22, chapter 26. Paul disregards the real apostles. he dismisses them in a very arrogant, nasty way. He mocks them, calling them super apostles. This guy is a snake. Do not let him in. Do not let him into your headspace. Don't follow his teachings. It's one of the worst things you could do. If Jesus warned about him, I'm going to stay away from the guy, and I'm going to echo that warning to other people. Now, some people might be asking, okay, so Paul is wrong about the law, but what does that mean for me, a Gentile? Do I have to do all of the 613 Jewish commandments? No. That was never the case for Gentiles. In fact, let's even look at that number of 613. There's actually no Jew that's ever lived that could do all 613 commandments, because there are different commandments for different people. You have commandments that are only for women. You have commandments that are exclusively for men. You have commandments for people who are divorcing. You have commandments for people who are getting married. You have commandments for parents. You have commandments for children. And not everybody, I mean, it's not humanly possible to be a human being who is all of those things. Even within the nation of Israel, you have, tribal distinctions. Not everybody is a Levi. There are certain commandments that pertain only to the Levim. There are certain commandments that pertain only to the Levim who are in the lineage of Aaron, the original high priest. Really hundreds of commandments there. And so the Torah is an instruction for all people. In fact, that's really what the word Torah means, instruction. It's not just rules and regulations, but it's an instruction which includes rules and regulations. And some people have more Torah responsibilities than others. And I can't get into the details of how this works right now. This video is already quite long. God willing, we could take a look at that in a separate video. But Gentiles have quite a bit less Torah obligations than the children of Israel do. But they still have obligations in the Torah. Their reduced number of obligations has nothing at all to do with these crazy ideas of Paul. It's just, even long before Paul's great grandpa had ever come to be, the Torah already had an idea of what are the obligations on Gentiles. And as I said, God willing, maybe we'll get into that someday. The important thing for right now is to just make the distinction that the lower number of obligations in the Torah for Gentiles has nothing at all to do with this, horrifically dark, nasty philosophy of Paul, where he's making the Torah out to be something bad, something, sinister, nefarious, a curse, a bondage. And that's not why Gentiles are excused from certain obligations. I hope you were able to get some benefits out of this video. Thanks for sticking around and hearing me out. Until next time, I pray that you're being blessed and guided by God, and I hope that I can offer something along the way. Thanks for listening, and be well.